Not too many surprises here. We talked about some guys that could potentially push for the roster, and a lot of those guys ultimately did make the football team. There were a few that I did not anticipate getting cut, like a Cam Sims, who I thought was going to make this football team. J.P. Finley was right. I was wrong. Finley said that Isaiah Wright was essentially a lock to make the football team. I disagreed. I thought that they would go with Cam Sims, and Trey Quinn would ultimately make the football team. Both of those guys were cut. The question was, would they go with 5 receivers or 6? I told you for much of the process, it was going to be 5. And then I changed my mind at the end and went with 6. They ultimately went with 6. We talked about whether they would go with 4 or 5 running backs. Well, we talked about that yesterday when Adrian Peterson was cut, and that was a surprise move. A big-time curveball thrown everyone's direction. So that let us know they were going to go with 4 versus 5 backs. And so when you look at the way they decided to go, they went a little heavier on the defensive side of the football, and they decided to spend their extra capital roster-wise on the offensive line, on the offensive side. So when you talk about the defensive line, we had 8 defensive linemen that we thought were going to make the team, or I had 8 defensive linemen that we thought were going to make the team. They ultimately kept 9. I said they were going to keep 9. Remember, I threw you the curveball of James Smith-Williams, who ultimately made the football team. So that was one of my curveballs that actually did come through. And so they kept 9 defensive linemen, which I thought they would. They kept 6 defensive backs. I initially had 6, and then I crossed out Greg Stroman, and they kept him. And so I got that one wrong as well. But I thought they were going to keep Aaron Colvin. They decided to go with Danny Johnson. We talked about that on the 53-man roster projection video as well, that he was a name to watch for this football team and that they really liked some of the things that he was doing. And so really, when you look at the grand scheme of things and you look at it from the bigger picture in terms of this roster, Ron Rivera, he tricked me. And I essentially went off of what everyone had been telling me up until the end of this process, which was Rivera sides with the veterans, and Rivera is going to take a look at this roster. He's gonna keep all the young guys he feels that he needs to keep, but a lot of these guys you can stash away on the practice squad, and he's going to do that. I tried to go with the practical approach, which is using all of the things that I've seen transpire over the years with, how you take the roster into consideration with the practice squad and young players, and then using the unique offseason as a way to get young guys onto the practice squad and not have to keep them because of what Rivera's his supposed rationale is usually going with veterans. I was wrong, and Rivera, I think he kind of went away from that. And he talked about it in his presser today, which was interesting. And again, if this information were privy to me earlier, if I were privy to this information earlier, then I might have adjusted my decision making. But Rivera said that in Carolina, what happened to them after the 2015 season when they went to the Super Bowl, he said they got old, like overnight. He looked up and the roster was old. And so I think that scarred him a bit. And they were never really the same team after that 2015 Super Bowl season. And so he said, you know what? I think I'm going to go with the young guys. And this is a different situation. Obviously, he's coming into a rebuilding project here in Washington. But we've talked about letting the young boys play all offseason. And Ron really backed that up here. Like I said yesterday when Adrian Peterson was released, I'm excited about this season because the young boys are really going to get to play. And Ron hammered that home with this 53-man roster. If you take nothing else away from what was done here over the last 48 hours with this roster, then this should be the one takeaway. The young boys are going to get to play. We're going to really find out who can play, who fits, and who doesn't on this roster with this team moving forward this season, because they're going to let the youngins play. I mean, they are going to let the young boys go out there and rumble, young men rumble. And we're going to find out who of this bunch can get it done and should be here long term, and who can't cut it and have to go. And Ron has told the young boys that have made the roster, like the Isaiah Wrights of the world and the Greg Stromans and some of these guys that were on the back end that made it. He said, look, we're going to be rotating a bunch of guys in here, so don't get very comfortable. You've got to prove it still, even though you made the football team, you've still got to prove it because we're going to be rotating a lot of guys in to find out what we have. Danny Johnson included. We're going to find out if you really belong here or not. We liked you enough to keep you on the 53, but you could easily be gone if we find someone else is better at your job than you are. So, again, the young boys are going to get to play. That's really exciting. And, you know, the Adrian Peterson cut was a sign of things to come. And that's when I probably should have known. And, you know, what I did was I just cut that one part of the roster out. And I said, wow, this must really mean they love Antonio Gibson. That was a huge part of it, and Rivera has said that already, that they just like what they have at the running back position as a whole with all the young guys. But I could have taken that a step further, and I probably should have taken it a step further in saying that this means that Rivera isn't going to be siding on the erring on the side of caution with veterans and just keeping veterans for the sake of keeping veterans and getting the young guys on the practice squad because you can sneak them onto the practice squad. He's going to throw caution to the wind, and he's going to keep the young boys. And the veterans are going to be in trouble if they don't produce at a high enough clip and haven't shown them enough. If things are equal and they see a young guy and they see a veteran, they're going to take the young guy. And that's what happened to Trey Quinn. That's what happened to Cam Sims. You know, that it became a numbers game at the end of the day. They went heavy on the offensive line. Had they cut ties with one more offensive lineman and only went with 9, as I predicted they would have, then you would have had an extra spot for a 6th receiver. But they decided to go heavy on offensive line because they traded for a tackle in David Sharp. So that pushed them to 10 offensive linemen. They didn't want to cut ties with Cornelius Lucas because they still need depth at tackle. Sadiq Charles isn't a guy that they're not sure about right now. And even if he's healthy, he still hasn't had a lot of work. So they want more depth at tackle. They were afraid to cut Cornelius Lucas loose because, again, this time of the year, there aren't a bunch of able-bodied tackles that you feel comfortable with in this league. And so if you cut a Cornelius Lucas, chances are you're not getting him back. So they didn't want to run the risk. And Ron said that. Look, at the along the offensive line, we were nervous about cutting ties with guys because we didn't think they were going to pass through waivers, and we just didn't want to take the risk. So instead of exposing those guys to the rest of the league, we just went ahead and kept the offensive line a little bit more robust than maybe we wanted to, but it was out of necessity. And because of that, it becomes a numbers game somewhere else. You decide to keep 4 running backs and only 5 wide receivers. I thought it was going to be a combination of 10 between receiver and running back, whether it's 5 and 5 or 6 and 4. I thought it was going to be 10 total when you looked at the receiver and running back position. It ended up being 9, and that's because they had to keep 10 offensive linemen instead of the 9 that I thought they originally were going to keep. So that was an interesting dynamic there. Let's talk about quickly some of the moves that were made, and then we'll get into the full 53-man roster. We'll break it down. We'll go through each player that made the football team, and then we'll get to your comments. So Cam Sims released. That was one that I didn't see coming. As I told you, I even made a short video that I said that Cam Sims was going to make the football team. I was shocked when I saw his name come across my timeline as a player that was released. Sean Davis was a guy that I told you, haven't heard a lot about Sean Davis in camp, but you know who we have heard a lot about? Cameron Curl, the 7th-round rookie out of Arkansas. I said, don't be surprised if Curl makes the team and Davis doesn't. I didn't anticipate that happening, however, but it was something that was definitely within the realm of possibility. We talked about that on the 53-man projection show. I told you Cameron Curl was a name to watch. I told you Rivera had good things to say about Cameron Curl and how he didn't repeat mistakes and how he had developed over the life of camp. Well, he impressed them enough to make this football team, and Sean Davis did not. He is gone. They gave him $2 million upon signing as a bonus. And that's the thing you got to love about what this organization is right now, is that it doesn't matter the amount of money a guy has been paid or is supposed to make. If you don't fit in this team's plans or you haven't proven to them over another guy that you belong. It doesn't matter how much money you've accumulated here or how much you're supposed to make. They're going to move on from you. In past years, we were keeping guys just because. That's not the case this year. You got to like that. And so Sean Davis, despite getting a nice, solid piece of change in the offseason, they moved on from him. Trey Quinn was released. Again, a lot of you saw that one coming. Okay, a lot of you saw the writing on the wall. A lot of you weren't Trey Quinn fans to begin with, so you wanted him gone. So any way you could get him out of here, you were looking to get him out of here. That's fine. I thought they were going to keep him. He was a veteran. I thought that he gave them another option in the slot. However, I did tell you this too. Isaiah Wright has been working every single position at wide receiver. He's been working the X. He's been working the Z. He's been working the Y. He's been working the slot as well. He's been working all over the football field. So it wasn't shocking that he himself made this football team and that they like him as a guy inside that can work the slot if need be as well. So Trey Quinn not on the football team. That was a bit of a surprise to me. Not to many of you out there, but it was to me. Reuben Foster to IR. So let me explain to you how IR works this year because it's a little bit different. You know, in the past, when you put a guy on IR, he was done for the year. And then you had the exception that was put out 2 years ago where, okay, you can put a guy on IR, but you get 2 IR exceptions, guys that can come off of the IR list early. And so this year with the COVID situation, the league has expanded that and made it unlimited. You can put as many guys on IR as you like and have them come off of IR after the first 3 weeks of the season whenever you deem them to be ready to go. And so they put Reuben Foster on IR, and he'll be able to come back onto the roster. At that point, though, someone will have to be released to create space for Reuben Foster. So again, this roster, while it is set at 53 now, guys will be cut throughout the course of the season to make room for some of the guys that they've put on IR that could potentially come off of it, like a Reuben Foster. And so Foster is going to play at some point this season when they deem him to be healthy enough and back to the Reuben Foster of old. I don't know when that's going to be. That could be week 4. That could be week 6. That could be week 8. That could be week 12 for all we know. Because remember, this is the last year of Reuben Foster's deal. So they're going to want to see Reuben Foster at some point to make a determination whether they want to re-sign him in the offseason, even if it's a 1-year prove-it deal, or they just want to cut him loose and allow him to sign elsewhere. They need to see him on the field to be able to make that determination whether he's a guy they want back or not. So Reuben Foster, for all intents and purposes, is on the football team. He's just on IR. Just look at it as him. He's in the oven baking right now, and when he's finished baking, they're going to pull him out of the oven, and he's going to be on this roster. Ryan Anderson was reportedly involved in trade talks. Now, we heard that this offseason. Nothing came of it. We talked about that a couple of times during the offseason, and would he be a guy that could be moved potentially? His name floated up again as a name potentially circulating around league circles in potential trade rumors. Nothing came of it again. There was no buzz for him to be traded earlier. I don't know if there was any buzz here. Rivera shot it down and pretty much said, look, there was really nothing out there. And really, we weren't even entertaining offers for Ryan Anderson. That's what you're supposed to say when you don't trade a guy. But I think they were entertaining offers, and I just think they didn't get anything worthy of making a deal. Because look at it this way. I've always used the used car analogy when talking about players that you can either cut or trade, and whether they have more value to you or someone else. And I always look at it with the used car analogy. If you've got a used car, it works perfectly fine, and you know it's got good mileage on it, and it's always done right by you, and you want $4,000 for the car, you know, and someone wants to pay you $3,000 or $2,500 for the car, and you're like, nope, I want $4,000. If I can't get $4,000 for it, I'm just gonna keep it. Why? Because the car has more value to you at $4,000 than it does to just let it go and get the cash value that someone's trying to give you for it. So essentially what I'm saying is, if they said, hey, we want a 4th round pick for Ryan Anderson, We spent a second round pick. We really like Ryan Anderson, and we feel like he can help us this year. If you give us a fourth rounder, he's yours. But if you're trying to lowball us and give us something less than a fourth rounder, we'll just keep him in Washington because we feel like we can get more value out of him than your fifth or your sixth or your seventh round pick. So I think that's kind of the way they went about this situation. Not that he wasn't available. I think he was. This is when there's smoke, there's fire. This isn't the first time we've heard of Ryan Anderson being on the block. I think they were looking to move him, and then they said, if we're not going to get the kind of value we think we can get out of him as a player, we're just going to hold on to him. And I do think they like him, and I do think they love his physicality, and I do think he has a place on this football team. But if they would have gotten some good compensation for him, I think they would have moved him. Similar to the Eagles with Alshon Jeffrey. Never, ever trust a man with two first names. They were looking to move Alshon Jeffrey, and if the right price would have come up, they would have moved on from him. But the right price didn't, and they said, you know what? Alshon Jeffrey is worth more to us than just giving him away for a hot ham and cheese sandwich in a juice box and a half-eaten bag of chips. We'll just hold on to him. Same thing here with Ryan Anderson. Because of Adrian Peterson's release, in lieu of that release, 26 became vacant, and Landon Collins decided he wants to go back to his college number of 26, which then vacated number 20, to which Jimmy Moreland said, I got to get out of the 30s and into the 20s. And so now Jimmy Moreland is number 20 and Landon Collins is 26. And I do want to throw this out here. 27 is still available. And for the life of me, I don't know why no one wants to touch 27. But 27 is available. It's a number in the 20s. Bryce Love, you're on this football team. Could you please get out of 35? 27 is calling your name. Now, there may be some relevance to 35 for Bryce Love. And look, at this point, the numbers are pretty much set. The team has announced the numbers, so I don't think they're going to change. But man, if I'm Bryce Love, and I keep harping on this, and I hate to keep doing this, I'm beating a dead horse, but I'm not sporting 35. That's not a cool number to have at the running back position, but I digress. And finally, Isaiah Wright made the football team, which I didn't see coming necessarily. I didn't count it out, but I didn't think he was going to make the football team. And Rivera threw me a changeup. All right, he told me, Isaiah Wright could have really benefited from more practice time this offseason, and he threw me a changeup. He gave me off speed. I was sitting fastball. He gave me off speed. So kudos to Rivera for switching the game up on me. I thought I knew, and he said, you don't know. Okay, you thought you knew what was coming. You were sitting dead red fastball, and you were looking 97. I gave you 87. You weren't ready. So kudos to him for that as well.
Louie.